Well, hello. Welcome back to the CompTIA Linux Plus review section. What we're going to do today is we're going to be covering Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is all about those basic Linux tasks. This is starting to get you familiar with that muscle memory so you understand how to traverse through a Linux operating system, so when you are asked about it on the Linux Plus, you will be prepared, but better yet, be prepared for industry. So, by the end of this chapter, we're going to be looking at the core philosophy behind Linux, how it functions. We're going to talk about the bash shell, the born again shell, okay? We're going to be learning how to navigate through the file system and through the files and directories. And then we're going to look through the file contents of text files. And then lastly, well, sometimes we're going to need some help. So how do we find those help pages within the operating system? So as I said before, we're going beyond the graphical interface. For those who are used to the Windows operating system, you pretty much lived in the graphical interface, but we are going to go through the command line interface, otherwise known as the CLI, and we're going to learn how to talk to the computer directly. This is a lot more efficient, a lot faster, and a much more powerful way of managing our systems, especially for system administration. Mainly because it is mostly the only way in a lot of Linux operating systems to manage the system. And the reason for this is we don't want to waste resources on the GUI, on the graphical interface, when all this machine is designed to do is to house a web server. So we run things through command line interfaces. So the basic Linux design philosophy. Small, sharp tools that work together. In other words, what we're talking about is we're saying, hey, imagine that carpenter's workshop. You don't have one giant machine that does everything for you. Instead, you're going to have different devices that do different specialized tasks, like a saw to cut wood, like a drill to drill through a piece of wood, or a sander to get some finishing touches. Each tool is designed to do one thing, and it does it really well. So as we're going through the Linux operating system, keep in mind of like, okay, this is a tool. How could I use the tool to do a task at hand? Where would I use this tool? Okay. So part one of the core principles. Do one thing very, very well. Like for instance, the ls command will help us list files, while the grep command will help us find things. They are masters at just one thing. And so we're going to have to learn how to use the tools of the Linux operating system. And sometimes we'll want tools to work together. Well, for one, I might want to drill a hole in a piece of wood, and then I may want to come back with a sander or something to help clean up that hole. We can use more than one of these tools in the same job, and we're going to do that with our programs as well. Like for instance, the piped output allows us to take the input from one command, or from the output of one command as the input of another. Okay. Now, the core principle of Linux as well is going to be everything is a file. I don't care if it is a hard drive, a file, a directory, a keyboard for anything. The keyboard itself is looked at as a file on a Linux operating system. This allows us to use the same tools on everything we do within a Linux operating system. Now, that might seem a little confusing at first, but as we go through the Linux Plus, you'll understand what we're meaning when we say everything is a file. And then we normally store all our data in plain text. All configuration files are human readable and can be edited pretty much with any tool that can edit files. This makes it very transparent and easy to manage. Okay, we're going to go through there. So let's talk more about the CLI. The shell is what we like to call. All right, CLI is the interface itself. It stands for Command Line Interface, while the shell is the program that listens to us. Think of it like the interpreter. Think of it like, well, I don't speak that language, so I might bring a translator in so that they can interpret the language for me. And that's what the shell does for us. As users, we don't know how to speak in binary and zeros and ones, so we use a shell to do the conversion process for us. We'll talk in human readable and human language, and the shell will convert it into machine language, so that way we don't have to talk to them, talk machine language. And my example here is like think as a Linux kernel as the CEO. Normally, most people don't talk to their CEO directly. They normally use a manager or someone intermediary to be able to talk to the CEO. So let's meet our shell. The shell that we're going to really use in this class is going to be the bash shell. The born again shell is the one that we are going to use, okay? It is the default shell in most Linux operating systems, including Ubuntu. And as I said in the previous chapter, we're going to be using Ubuntu quite a bit when we're dealing with studying for the CompTIA Linux Plus. And the nice thing about the born again shell, and the reason why I like to use it a lot over any other shell, is, well, if you learn it in a born again shell, in a bash shell, then you're going to be able to use that information in pretty much any other operating system that you use. When you first log in to a Linux operating system, you're going to find this prompt. And when you're logging in with the YO Cyber Range, you're going to notice, well, we log in with the username student quite a bit into our student information. And so when we log in, you're going to see this prompt. And so the prompt is going to be your username. Who are you currently logged in as? And on this shell, we're logged in as student. That's our username. At which machine? Where are we at? What server are we on? And it's going to give you the computer's host name. And so maybe it's something as simple as Linux VM. And then it's going to give us, well, where is our current working directory? Okay. Current working directory could be a tilde, which is a shortcut for our home directory, or it may be a directory structure. Okay, and we're going to see different things as we use this. Just be aware that we can destruct the actual command line prompt here and know a lot of information. We know our username, we know our host name, we know where we're currently at, and we even know what kind of permissions we have. A $sign says we're a regular user, while a hashtag means we have root credentials. And root credentials in a Linux operating system is like the administrator. It's the keys to the kingdom. That user can do anything and everything on the system. It's also the user we need to be the most careful with, because if it can do anything, it can really do a lot of damage, okay? And so just like we do on a Windows operating system, we don't want to give administrator out to everybody. We actually hold that back a little bit. Normally your IT infrastructure will have the administrator credentials. Our users normally are just a regular user. They normally can't install software, they can't do too much, but they can utilize the box just like any other normal user. Now, on this prompt, we're going to use commands. And these commands, again, are going to be our toolkits. These are the tools that I was talking about that we're going to have in our back pocket. How are we going to interface with the born again shell on our prompt? Well, we're going to use commands. And the commands follow a pretty consistent structure when it deals with Linux. We're going to see our command. That's always going to go first. This is very mandatory. You have to tell it which tool are we using. Then we're going to give it some options. Sometimes the tool may have different bits. Think of it like a drill bit. Does your drill only have one bit that you can stick on there, or could you put different drill sizes or different screwdriver bits on there? Well, our commands can do the same thing. We can give it different behavior by giving it usually an option. And the options normally start with a dash, okay? So it may, for instance, we may use the command ls for listing of a file system. Well, if I do a -L for long listing, I might be able to get more information out than if I didn't use that option. And then lastly, we may actually have a argument, and not always will we have an argument. These are optional as well. And maybe we're trying to do something in a directory. Maybe we wanted to delete a directory or make a file. Whatever we're doing, these are the arguments of our commands. So if you ever get asked this on the test, it's always going to be command, then it's going to be options, and then arguments. So command, options, arguments. And here's an example of it. And remember my example of doing ls as a command. So ls will give us a list of contents of a directory. So our command is ls, our option is -l, and our argument is, well, what directory do I want to see? And this one will say I want the home directory. So our command is ls, our option is -l, and our argument is /home. Now, there are some other commands that we're going to start learning here. So what we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to start learning a lot of the basic commands. PWD, present working directory. Where am I? Where am I currently at on the operating system? This is what PWD will do. LS, what's in here? Give me a list. Give me a list of what's in there. Okay. CD, I want to change directories. I want to go somewhere else. These are some core commands that you're going to use, and you will practice it through this chapter's labs. So just keep in mind, you will need to know these commands, and so if you're not familiar with these commands as of yet, just practice and keep remembering these commands themselves. Rewatch this video, do some flashcards, do the labs. You'll be fine, and as you use them more and more, you'll start memorizing them. For example, here's our present working directory. Our present working directory is, well, where am I? PWD, and this is what it would look like. PWD, I'm in home student. You are here. Here's my list contents. You have a flashlight and you're looking inside the directories, what's inside of here. And remember, we can have arguments here. Remember, we have ls. ls just gave me the folder number, the folder and file names right here. But if I did an ls-l, it'll give me a lot more information. And we'll decipher what all of this means as we go through this course. But as you see, I have a ton more information by giving it the long listing. Same tool, ls, but with a different option attached to it. We can do cd. We can move into a directory. We can cd to an absolute path. In other words, we can cd directly somewhere on the hard drive. We could cd to go up a level by doing a ... Or we could do a cd tilde to say, go to my home directory. Think of the home directory kind of like your desktop on Windows. It's where all of your files are currently going to be located. So cd is very versatile as well. Now something I want to point out here, did you notice the capital D on documents? Something I want to point out is Linux is case sensitive. An uppercase D and a lowercase d is two different Ds, so it will treat it as two different folders. So make sure that when you're typing your commands, you're being case sensitive with your commands. If it is an uppercase D, make sure you type an uppercase D. Okay, our next set of commands we're going to go through today is going to be, well, how do we organize our space? How do I create new directories? How do I copy things? How do I move things? And how do I remove things when I really need to? Okay. And we'll go through each one of those. For instance, making directories. Making directories is as easy as mkdir. Let's make a directory named project. And this will create a new directory. Now, if I want to create a new file with nothing inside of it, I'll use a different command called touch. Touch is the other command. So for instance, I can make a directory called project, and then I can touch a file inside a project called notes.txt. But I need to tell it where it is. It's inside of a folder called project, and I'm going to create a new text file called notes.txt. And so the touch command is very useful when you want to update a file or create a file. Now, if we already have a file, we could also do other commands such as copy the file. So here's copy, CP for copy. You need to give it the source file and then where you're going to. Source and destination. Okay? So the source file could be that notes.txt file, and maybe I want to give it a new destination. I can put it somewhere else. If you specify a name on copy, it actually will copy the file but also rename the file at the same time. The move file, on the other hand, is, well, it's kind of like cutting a file in Windows and moving it somewhere else and pasting it. That's what we're doing. We're going to move the file from the current working directory, and maybe we want to move it into the project directory that we created. So a ./ means in the current working directory, move it into a folder called project. And how do I know it's a folder? The / at the end denotes that project is a folder. You could also rename a file using move as well, by just going with old and new name, just like if we did a copy. But a copy leaves the old file in place, while a move moves the file to a new location or a new name. Our last command on this managing our workspace is going to be deleting of files. So we're going to talk about removing. So you can remove an old file by using the command rm. rm for remove, old_file.txt. Or you can remove an empty directory by using rmdir. And I do specify that it needs to be an empty directory for this command to work. By default, this command does not remove directories with files inside of it. There are other ways to do that. Now, here's a huge warning here, right? Danger! Danger, Will Robinson. We're going to be careful when we use the rm command, mainly because there is not a recycle bin on the command line. You're so used to that if you delete something on accident within a Windows operating system that you'll be able to bring it back from the recycle bin. But in Linux, if you use a command line and delete a file, this will delete everything, and it is not recoverable. Okay, so make sure that you're typing your commands perfectly, because if you make a mistake, hopefully you have a backup. Okay, this is one of those commands that we always have to be very careful with. Okay, now rm-r is a recursive command. It will delete a directory and every file underneath it. Okay, and it will be instant and it will be permanent. So be very, very careful before running this command. Now our next set of commands is going to be, well, viewing files. We learned how to look for files, we learned how to make files, but now we need to look at how are we going to view the files that are on our hard drive. And some of the basic commands that we're going to use will be cat, less, head, and tail. Now these are just tools for reading files. They don't normally let us edit files, but they'll let us view files. And each one has a different way of letting us use it. For instance, cat on the first hand would be cat shopping list, and it will dump everything in that file to your list. Imagine you had a file that had 100 pages of text in it. Cat would look ridiculous. There's no way that we're going to read that as it flies by on our screen. But if we do have a large file like that, then I would probably want to use a command called less. Now less, on the other hand, is a viewer that we can scroll through with our arrow keys. The arrow keys will let us go through the content of the text file, and when we're done, all we have to do is press Q to quit. Okay? This is an essential tool for if you're looking at something that is just a long, long file. Okay? So cat and less are great tools, but one is used for short files and one could be used for very long files. Our other two commands for looking at files is going to be heads and tails. If you think about it, if I want to look at the head of something, I'm looking at the beginning. I'm looking at the top of something. If I'm looking at the tail of something, I'm looking at the end of something. So we can look at the beginning or the end of a file real easily, depending on what type of file we're looking at. Now, one of the files that we like to use heads and tails on will be system log files. System log files can be large, enormous, but sometimes the new content will be at the end of the file, and sometimes the new content will be at the beginning of the file. So if the new content's at the beginning of the file, and we want to look at maybe the last 10 lines, when we can look at the head of a file. But if we want to look at the bottom of the file, let's say the new lines are at the bottom of the file, maybe we want to look at the bottom so we can say tail of the file. Now these are some really cool commands, and we can even use some options with these as we go through it. And so I'll show you here in a second on how to get some help with Linux. And if you wanted to know, instead of 10 lines, maybe I want to look at the last 50 lines of a file, how would I do so? Well, you're going to have to look that answer up with the help commands that we're going to learn. And just like everything in IT, you do not need to memorize every command and every option, okay? Especially on this test, you don't need to know all their options. You need to know the very basics, all the ones we're going through today, but you do not need to memorize every option that can come with them, okay? But you do need to know how to find the answer. And so one of the easiest way on any command is you normally could type the -- help command on the end of the command. Now this is kind of like the little cheat sheet is what we like to call this. It's the cheat sheet of the commands. So if I do mkdir -- help, this will show me the help page for that command, so that way I understand how to use that command. It'll tell me the format it needs to be in, and even give me a whole bunch of options that might be useful to me. Maybe those are the options I'm looking for. The other way to do it is to pull up the manual. The manual of these commands can be quite large, especially for some of them, but if you need to look at the manual of a command, think of it like a manual of a tool. Well, you could type the word man for manual, M-A-N, space, and the command that you're trying to look up. For instance, man space ls will give me a detailed document covering every aspect of this command. Probably way too much than I want to look for, but it does have a manual. Now, what's really great about having the manual here is this is built into the operating system. You do not need internet access to consult the manual. It's built in, so we don't need to worry about, do I have internet access or do I not? And if you're working on a problem or troubleshooting an issue, know that the -- help and the man pages are always going to be there for you. Now, once you open up the man page, it's going to be separated out into this format. It's kind of like the wiki page of the tool itself. At the top, you're going to have the name. This is going to be the one-line summary of the tool itself. ls is used to display a listing of files within a directory. Cool, that's the name of the file. Synopsis will give you a little bit of a syntax check for how do I use that command. The description is a lot more text of a description of the command itself, every available option for that tool, and what I like, my favorite part of a man page is the examples. Sometimes reading through a man page is still kind of convoluted. It's kind of hard to read. So I go to the very bottom of the page, and a lot of times the command that I'm looking for is going to be there as an example. And this way I can understand how to use the tool properly. Now, if you want to navigate the man pages, you can use the arrow keys that will go up and down, for example. One of the best features of a man page would be the /. This is like your find. So in Windows, you would hit Control F for find, or go to Edit and find. Well, in Linux, you can click the / when you're in a man page, type a word, like maybe I'm looking for directory, and I can type the word directory, hit enter, and it will show me anytime that word shows up in the manual. That way I'm not searching through a very long manual when all I'm doing is looking for a specific term, okay? Now you can keep hitting N to continue on to the next word in the manual page that maybe says directory, for example. And then when we're all said and done with the manual page, all we do is we hit Q for quit, and we're done with that page. Now, there could be some other resources. These are some newer resources that are there. Man and dash dash help will definitely be on the CompTIA Linux Plus. These are the main ways of trying to find help. Okay. Now, if you want to, the newer operating systems will also have info, which is kind of like man, but it gives you a little more hyperlink style documentation. This is really cool because the info pages are kind of like the readmes. It has the HTML pages for a lot of the tools. They're sometimes a little easier to navigate than go through a man page. But for those that are trying to prepare for the CompTIA Linux Plus, I highly recommend to not use the info pages. Okay? Know they exist, but use the man pages, as this is what's going to help you build up your muscle memory. All right, so we went through a lot in this chapter, and for those who have never touched Linux before, it's going to be a little bit to get used to, okay? Make sure that as you're going through these chapters, that you're going through each one, taking the labs, and if you need to, do them more than once. Just because you mark it as complete in Wild Cyber Range doesn't mean you can't go back and do it again, okay? So make sure that you know your present working directory, your listings, your CDs. You know how to navigate through the systems. Make sure you know how to make directories, touch files, copy, move, and rename files, okay? And remember those removing. Removing is really going to be one of those things that we have to be very, very careful with when we're dealing with Linux, especially with CLI. You do not want to delete something that you do not have a backup of on accident, so make sure there's backups before you use that command in a real-life enterprise environment. We can now view some of our files by using cat or less or head or tail. We have the capability, and we now know the basic ways of getting help with the operating system itself by using dash dash help and the man pages. And then we know a little bit that there is an info page out there, but we're not going to use it for the certification, right? But just know that it does exist. All right, that's the end of chapter 2, and remember, if you have any questions, we do have our discussion board at the bottom right corner of your course. Make sure that you work together as students. Learn. Let's go through this. Go through the course itself. Try to get some muscle memory, okay, as you're going through here. And this will prepare you for the CompTIA Linux Plus exam. All right, I will see you for the next chapter. Good luck on your studies.